The flame didn't spread fast, but it spread just enough. It started as a whisper of heat along the hem of Emily Carter's ivory gown, so subtle that for half a second she thought it was just the warmth of the ballroom lights reflecting off the polished marble floors of the Grand Regency Hotel, the kind of place where every chandelier looked like it cost more than a house and every guest wore smiles sharper than their diamonds. But then the warmth turned real, and her breath caught. And her hand moved instinctively to her stomach where her unborn child shifted gently, unaware of the silence that was about to swallow the room whole. And just like that, the music faltered, not completely stopping but stuttering, like the pianist had missed a beat, and a ripple moved through the crowd as heads turned one by one, drawn not by sound but by instinct, by the subtle tension that precedes something no one is prepared to witness. And Emily stood there, frozen in the center of it all. Her heart beat loud in her ears, her fingers trembling against the delicate fabric as she looked down, really looked this time, and saw the faint darkening at the edge of her dress, saw the way people were beginning to step back, just a few inches at first, then a little more, as if distance alone could separate them from whatever was unfolding, and somewhere behind her, a soft click echoed, small, precise, almost polite, the kind of sound that didn't belong in chaos but always arrived just before it. And when Emily turned her head, slowly, carefully, as if sudden movement might shatter something fragile in the air, she saw Vanessa Blake standing there, flawless as ever, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable except for the faint curve of satisfaction that didn't quite reach her eyes, and in that moment, everything else blurred, the laughter, the clinking glasses, the whispered conversations that had filled the room just seconds ago, all of it faded into a distant hum. Because what replaced it was heavier, thicker, a silence that pressed down on every guest like an invisible weight, and Emily's gaze shifted again, searching, needing, landing finally on Richard Carter, her husband, standing only a few feet away in his tailored black suit, the same man who had once promised to protect her, to stand beside her no matter what, and for a second, just 1 second, she waited for him to move, to step forward, to say something, anything, but he didn't. He just stood there, his jaw tight, his eyes flickering not with concern but calculation, as if he were already measuring the cost of what this moment might become, and that was when the realization settled in, quiet and cold, more powerful than any shock, more cutting than any accusation. And Emily's lips parted, not in a scream, not in panic, but in something softer, something almost lost beneath the tension in the room, a whisper meant for no one but herself and the life she carried. "We're okay," she murmured, though even she wasn't sure if she believed it, and somewhere in the distance, a phone lifted, then another, tiny screens capturing fragments of a moment that would soon belong to millions, though none of them understood yet what they were witnessing, none of them knew that this wasn't just a scandal waiting to unfold, not just another headline destined to burn bright and fade fast, because some events don't end when the music stops, some moments don't fade when the lights dim, and as Emily stood there, surrounded by wealth, by power, by people who would pretend they hadn't seen what they had clearly witnessed, something else had already begun, something quieter, something far more dangerous, something that would not be contained within the walls of a ballroom. Because far away from the glitter and glass, in a place where silence meant control and power moved without announcement, a man would soon receive a single message, and when he did, everything connected to this night would start to change, not loudly, not immediately, but inevitably, because some fires don't need to spread to be remembered, and some sparks don't just burn fabric, they burn futures. The first scream never came from Emily, it came from somewhere to her left, sharp and unfiltered, the kind of reaction that breaks through social training and expensive etiquette, and suddenly the room remembered how to move, how to breathe, how to react, waiters stepping forward and then hesitating, guests shifting back in a widening circle, voices rising in uneven waves as confusion spread faster than any flame ever could. And through it all Emily remained still, not because she did not understand what was happening, but because she understood too much, her hand steady against her stomach, her eyes no longer searching the crowd but fixed on Richard, studying him now with a clarity she had not felt in years, noticing the way his shoulders stayed squared, the way his expression remained controlled, the way he did not reach for her even as someone finally draped a jacket around her shoulders, and in that moment something inside her settled, not panic, not fear. Something quieter, something final, like a door closing without sound, and when she finally spoke again her voice was calm, almost detached. "Did you know?" she asked, not loudly, not accusing, just enough for him to hear, and for a fraction of a second his composure cracked, not in guilt but in irritation, as if the question itself were inconvenient, as if this entire moment had become a disruption he had not planned for, and that was answer enough, more than enough, and across the room Vanessa Blake adjusted the cuff of her sleeve, her posture untouched by the tension around her, her gaze drifting lazily over the scene as if she were observing a performance rather than standing at the center of it, and when their eyes met, she did not look away, she simply smiled, slow and deliberate, a smile that said this had never been an accident, that every second of this night had been calculated long before the first guest arrived. And somewhere behind the growing crowd a man in a dark suit spoke quietly into an earpiece, his tone low but urgent. Requesting something, securing something, and within seconds another staff member nodded, disappearing toward the back corridors where cameras recorded everything and secrets rarely stayed buried unless someone powerful decided they should, and the music had stopped completely now, leaving only the hum of whispered conversations and the distant clink of glass as someone set down a champagne flute with shaking hands. And Emily felt the shift. Not just in the room but in the narrative unfolding around her, because this was no longer about a moment of humiliation, it was about control, about who would define what had happened here and who would decide what the world would eventually see, and as if to confirm that realization, a young woman near the entrance lowered her phone slowly, her expression uncertain, glancing toward a hotel manager who gave a subtle shake of his head, a silent instruction that was immediately obeyed, devices disappearing, eyes turning away, the story already being rewritten in real time, and Emily let out a slow breath, not defeated, not broken, just aware, more aware than she had ever been, and when the paramedics were finally called, when hands guided her gently toward the exit, when the cool night air replaced the heavy tension of the ballroom, she did not look back, not at the chandeliers, not at the guests, not even at Richard, because something had already shifted beyond repair, something that could not be undone by apologies or explanations or carefully crafted statements, and as the ambulance doors closed with a soft but final sound, somewhere miles away in a glass tower that overlooked the city skyline, a phone buzzed once on a silent desk, the screen lighting up in the darkness with a single message that contained no details. No explanation, just a name, Emily Carter, and for a man like William Carter, that was all it took. The ambulance moved through the city without sirens, just a steady hum of tires against asphalt and the quiet beeping of a monitor that filled the space with a rhythm too fragile to ignore, and Emily lay back against the narrow stretcher, her eyes fixed on the ceiling lights passing above her one by one, each one blurring into the next like moments she could not separate anymore, and for the first time since the gala, she allowed herself to close her eyes, not to escape but to remember, because memory had a way of rearranging truth when you were not paying attention, and she needed to see it clearly now, needed to understand how she had arrived at this exact point, how a life that once felt carefully built had shifted so quietly beneath her feet that she had not noticed the cracks forming until everything began to give way, and it started, she realized, not with Vanessa, not even with the gala, but long before that. Back when Richard Carter had still looked at her like she was the only person in the room, back when his voice softened when he said her name, back when promises sounded like something solid instead of something rehearsed, and she remembered the first apartment they shared, small by the standards he lived by now, barely. Every sound had a purpose, every movement was intentional, and for the first time since the gala, Emily was alone, not physically, there were still people around her, still footsteps outside the door, still voices in the hallway, but alone in the sense that no one here knew the full story, no one here had seen the look on Richard's face, no one here had felt the weight of that silence in the ballroom. And that distance gave her something unexpected, space to think without interruption. Space to finally connect the pieces without distraction, and her mind moved quickly now, not scattered but focused, replaying moments with a new clarity, the conversations that had felt incomplete, the subtle dismissals she had excused, the way Vanessa had appeared in their lives not suddenly but gradually, always just at the edge of something important, a meeting, a dinner, a trip that extended longer than necessary. And Emily realized that what she had once thought of as coincidence had never been coincidence at all. It had been design, careful and deliberate, and the realization did not make her angry, not yet. It made her precise. It sharpened something inside her that had been dulled by trust and routine. And just as that thought settled, the door opened again, not loudly, not urgently, just enough to break the stillness, and a doctor stepped in, reviewing a chart, offering a brief, professional smile, explaining that everything appeared stable for now, that they would continue to monitor both her and the baby closely, that rest was important, and Emily listened, absorbing every word, because stability was not something she took for granted anymore, not after everything she had just seen. And as the doctor left and the door closed once more, the room fell quiet again, the kind of quiet that does not comfort but prepares, and somewhere deep in the building, unseen and unheard, information was already moving, names being checked, calls being made, decisions forming in places where outcomes were shaped long before they became visible. And Emily lay there, her eyes open, her breathing steady, unaware that while she had finally begun to see the truth of her own life, someone else had already begun to rewrite it. The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second stretching just enough to be noticed, and Emily lay still beneath the thin hospital blanket, her eyes tracing the faint cracks in the ceiling paint as if they might form a pattern she could follow, something predictable in a night that had offered none, and the monitor beside her kept its steady rhythm, a quiet reassurance that something inside her was still strong, still holding on, and she focused on that sound, letting it anchor her while everything else continued to shift beyond her control, because control, she realized now, had never been as secure as she believed. It had only felt that way when she trusted the wrong person to share it, and the thought settled without bitterness, without anger, just a calm understanding that changed the way everything before this moment looked in hindsight. And as she turned her head slightly toward the window, the city lights beyond the glass shimmered in soft reflections, distant and indifferent, a reminder that life outside this room had not paused, that conversations were still happening. Decisions were still being made. Narratives were already forming, and she could almost hear them, the carefully worded explanations, the quiet reassurances, the subtle shifts in tone that would transform what had happened into something less serious, less intentional, something easier to accept, and she knew Richard would be at the center of that effort, not out of concern for her but out of instinct, the same instinct that had kept him composed in the ballroom. The same instinct that measured consequences before emotions, and, for the first time, Emily did not feel the urge to correct that version of events. She did not feel the need to defend herself or explain the truth to people who had already decided what they wanted to believe, because something inside her had changed, something that no longer needed validation to exist. And just as that realization settled, a soft knock broke the quiet, barely audible but enough to shift her attention toward the door. And when it opened, it was not a nurse this time, not a doctor with charts and careful words, but a man in a dark suit who did not belong to the rhythm of this place, his presence too still, too deliberate, and he stepped inside without hesitation, closing the door gently behind him, his eyes scanning the room once before settling on Emily with a level of focus that felt different from everyone else she had encountered since arriving, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the silence stretching in a way that was not uncomfortable but intentional. And then he inclined his head slightly, a gesture of quiet respect, before speaking in a voice that was calm but carried weight beneath it. "Miss Carter, I was asked to make sure you are safe," he said, not offering a name, not explaining further, and Emily studied him carefully, noting the way he stood, the way his posture suggested training, discipline, purpose, and something about it felt familiar, not personally, but in the sense that it belonged to a world she had once known but never fully understood, a world of quiet influence and unseen decisions, and her gaze sharpened just slightly as she asked. "Asked by who?" Her tone steady, controlled, and the man did not hesitate, did not soften his answer or redirect it. He simply said, "Your father." And the words did not land like a surprise, not exactly, but like a confirmation of something that had been waiting just beneath the surface. something inevitable, and for the first time that night, Emily exhaled differently, not with tension, not with uncertainty, but with the recognition that whatever came next would not be shaped solely by the people who had tried to define her story, because somewhere beyond this room, beyond this hospital, beyond the reach of the narrative being quietly constructed without her, someone else had already stepped in, someone who did not ask for permission to act. And as the man remained by the door, silent and watchful, the balance of this story began to shift in a way no one at the gala had anticipated. The man did not move after he spoke, as if his presence alone was enough to change the atmosphere of the room, and Emily could feel it, the subtle shift in the air, the way the silence now carried a different weight, not uncertainty but control, and she studied him for another moment before her gaze drifted back to the window, the city lights still distant but somehow sharper now. As if the world outside had come into clearer focus the moment his words confirmed what she had already begun to sense, and for a few seconds neither of them spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because both understood that the next words would matter. And Emily finally broke the silence, her voice quiet but steady. "He did not call me," she said, not as a complaint, not as an accusation, just a fact placed carefully between them, and the man nodded once, acknowledging it without surprise. "He rarely does," he replied, his tone even, almost neutral, but there was something beneath it, something that suggested familiarity with a man who operated differently from most, a man who did not need conversation to act, and Emily let that settle. Because it matched what she remembered, what she had always known but rarely spoken about, that her father did not move through the world the way others did, he did not react loudly or immediately, he observed, he calculated, and when he decided to act, it was never small, and the realization did not bring comfort, not exactly, but it brought certainty, and certainty, she realized, was something she had been missing for a long time, and as she adjusted slightly against the pillows, her hand resting again over her stomach, she felt a small movement beneath her palm, a quiet reminder that this was not just about her anymore, that every decision, every consequence, extended beyond her own life now, and her expression shifted, not visibly to anyone else, but internally, a subtle alignment of priorities that sharpened her focus even further, and she looked back at the man by the door, her eyes clearer now, more deliberate. "What has he done?" she asked, not out of curiosity but out of understanding, because she knew something had already begun, something beyond this room, beyond this hospital, and the man paused for just a fraction of a second, as if measuring how much to say, before answering. "He has asked questions," he said, simple, understated, but the words carried implications far beyond their surface, and Emily understood immediately, because questions from a man like William Carter were never just questions, they were the beginning of a process, one that uncovered details others worked very hard to keep hidden, and as if to confirm that thought, the man continued, his voice still calm, still controlled. "The hotel has already received a request regarding their security footage, and the company your husband runs has been flagged for a preliminary audit." And he stopped there, not elaborating, not dramatizing, because he did not need to, the meaning was clear enough, and Emily felt something shift again, not in the room, not in the situation, but within herself, a quiet realization that whatever had been carefully managed, carefully concealed, was no longer entirely under the control of the people who had created it, and she exhaled slowly, not with relief, not with satisfaction, but with acceptance, because this was not about revenge, not yet, it was about truth. About exposure, about allowing what had been hidden to finally be seen, and as the monitor beside her continued its steady rhythm, as the city lights flickered beyond the glass, Emily closed her eyes briefly, not to escape but to prepare, because she understood now that the story unfolding around her was no longer something she would simply endure, it was something she would witness from a different position entirely, and when she opened her eyes again, there was no hesitation left in them, only clarity, only resolve, and somewhere far from the quiet of that hospital room, the first pieces of a much larger consequence were already falling into place. Morning arrived quietly, not with sunlight but with a gradual shift in the tone of the hospital room, the pale gray outside the window softening into something lighter, something that suggested the world had moved forward whether anyone inside these walls was ready for it or not, and Emily noticed it not because she had slept but because she had not. Her eyes opened through the long stretch of hours where time seemed to pause and then accelerate without warning, her thoughts no longer scattered, but arranged, each one placed carefully as if she were rebuilding something from the ground up, and beside her the monitor continued its steady rhythm, unchanged, dependable, a contrast to everything else that had proven fragile, and the man by the door had not left, his presence constant, unobtrusive, a silent assurance that whatever had begun the night before had not stopped when the doors closed. And as the first nurse entered with morning checks, her movements efficient and practiced, Emily observed the routine with a detached clarity, answering questions, allowing adjustments, acknowledging instructions, but her attention was elsewhere, fixed on the subtle changes she could not yet see but knew were happening, because she understood now that influence did not announce itself loudly, it moved quietly, reshaping outcomes long before they became visible, and just